Hi, everyone. Quick note before we get started. I wanted to just thank everyone for your support and feedback on the podcast. We just hit 1,000 downloads, if you saw my Facebook post, which is amazing. And I just appreciate you guys so much. If you like the podcast, please, please, please leave a review on it so that we can get it out there for even more people to hear. I love you guys. Thank you again for all of the support. It's been really an incredible ride so far that I am looking forward to continuing. So that's it. Let's get into today's episode. Welcome to Unbroken the Podcast. I'm Savannah Levins. I started this podcast because in my life experience and working as a news reporter, I found everyone's been knocked down or blindsided or had their world seemingly turned upside down at some point. And for many people, it's cathartic to talk about their experiences out loud. And likewise, it can be therapeutic to hear other people's stories and know that there is light at the end of all darkness. If you have a story you'd like to share on the podcast, I'd love to hear from you. Just email unbrokenthepodcast@gmail.com and please rate, review, and subscribe. Today on the podcast, we have Jen with a really tough story. She lost her husband to cancer just a few months ago. Now she's a widowed mom of twin 5-year-old boys. Her love story is amazing and tragic and heartwarming, all wrapped up into one. To say her story is powerful is just a huge understatement. So let's get into it. Here's Jen. Today on the podcast, we have Jen. Jen, thank you so much for being here.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
So let's talk about when your husband was diagnosed with this cancer. Can you kind of start there and tell your story from there?
Sure. And it didn't start off as he had cancer. It started off with he had this kind of random bump on his shin that kind of just wasn't getting any better. And he had noticed it, and then I noticed it. And then we kind of had a powwow about it and decided he had been to Atlantic City for work, and we thought, I bet it's bed bugs. And so then we tried to treat it at home. It just kept getting worse. So then that started us down the road of him going to the doctor, being on a series of antibiotics, a series of kind of misdiagnosis, which all relatively short in the grand scheme of things. Mm-hmm. It was like 7 days on antibiotic. It didn't get better. He went back. They put him on another antibiotic. He had allergic reaction. He went back, and then we made it to a dermatologist who said, right, something's not right. We think it might be fungal, so let's do a biopsy. So then...
Let me ask you, in this whole process, were you thinking, this is probably nothing, let's just figure out what it is, or was your head in the worst case scenario? No. You never in a million years thought this was something serious?
No, not anything about it. We thought it was a bug bite that had just gotten infected. That's all we could think.
Mm-hmm. And then the dermatologist says he wants to do a biopsy, though.
Yeah, because we had been kayaking, freshwater kayaking, and so that kind of set off a little bit of a red flag, like, oh, well, you might have picked some sort of like a freshwater kind of fungus or bacteria or something from kayaking, mm-hmm. And so then we went down that road. So it went off to a lab. The results came back inconclusive. It said that there were this abnormal lymphocytes. And we were like, well, what does that mean? And they said, well, it could just mean an infection. So we're like, okay. So again, it means nothing. So it was sent off to another lab. And this was sent to a lab in Jacksonville, Florida, right around the time that, I don't know if you remember, but Jacksonville got hit by a hurricane and there was massive flooding. Mm-hmm. And so there it sat in that lab that was out of commission because of the flooding. And so then it was taken, and this is when we started to think, okay, this might be something more serious, but we still didn't really know what, because if you Google abnormal lymphocytes, it doesn't really tell you anything. Mm-hmm. It tells you the whole spectrum of bad to an infection.
And of course, when something happens, you try so hard not to freak yourself out.
Yes.
So I'm sure you were purposefully trying to reel it in.
Very much so.
How much time passed from the first time you noticed the lump to this point where it's sitting in Jacksonville and you're like, all right, we need to do something?
So we had family pictures taken around about the weekend of August the 12th or something. And the weekend before we had been kayaking. So the weekend before, clear picture of his shin, no mark on it. The next weekend, family pictures, you can see his shin, there's the mark. So around about the beginning of August. And I think his biopsy was sent off at the beginning of September.
Okay.
So not long.
Yeah.
And all of this is happening in a really short period of time. Mm-hmm. So we finally get the lab results back, and he goes in. Again, we're still not really thinking it's all that serious. And he goes in to see the PA at the dermatologist's office and finds out that it's cancer. And she kind of, she tells him at that point, she's like, just take a deep breath. Don't assume the worst. It's called cutaneous T-cell lymphoma, and it's a very rare but survivable form of cancer. People don't die from this cancer. People with this cancer live with it and die from old age, is what we were told. So we were kind of like, still a big kind of thing to digest, but we're like, all right, like we're going to figure this out.
And I want to pause here and let's go back even further, because I want to add a little context to you and your husband's relationship and your kids. Can you tell me how you and your husband met and got married, and a little bit about you two?
I think I think I had a good friend who used to say that we had movie love. Chris and I had movie love, and I think that it stuck with me for all these years. And when I tell you the story, you might kind of agree. But we met in high school. He had moved to Florida from Texas around about the 10th grade. We met somewhere around the 11th grade. We had our first kiss the night that we graduated from high school.
Wow.
I went off to college for the summer. He didn't. We kind of drifted apart because back then there weren't cell phones and Facebook and Instagram and everything to hold you together. And then just by chance, I moved into an apartment for my freshman fall semester at the University of Florida, and walked out into the parking lot, and there he was. He had moved into the same apartment complex. Wow. Completely unplanned, completely it wasn't anything that we had planned at all. I didn't even know. I think at the point that we had lost touch, he hadn't even decided where he was going to college. Mm-hmm. So I didn't even know he was going to be there. And that kind of, when you're new, you start university and you don't really know a lot of people, you gravitate towards who you know. And he became my best friend. We weren't dating. We just hung out all the time. Mm-hmm. We had very similar interests. We had similar friends. I introduced him to the people I'd met in the summer. He introduced me to people I didn't know. It was just natural. Mm-hmm. And then that led to our relationship. And so we started dating probably towards the end of our freshman year of college is when we officially kind of started dating, and we moved in together our sophomore year, and that's kind of it. He has been a part of my life from the time that I was kind of 17, 18 years old. Mm-hmm. We grew up together. Literally, we grew into adults together. We got married in 2004. Shortly after that, we moved to Atlanta for a couple of years, and then shortly after that, we kind of made one of the best decisions I think we ever made in our life, which was we decided to move to London, and we lived in London together for 10 years.
Wow.
And traveled the world, and we moved there when we were about, I guess I turned 30. My first birthday in London was 30, and so kind of from 30 to 38, that's where we lived. It was and away from family, and just the two of us. And then
movie love, like you said. Yeah. I mean, from kids to traveling the world as adults, and that's And you're married, and then eventually you come back to the States.
Yeah, well, before that happened, we had tried for years to have kids, mm-hmm. 7 years to be precise. We did IVF, we did all of the things. Ultimately decided to adopt, and it's the movie, I'm telling you. And then we got approved for adoption. We were waiting to be matched, and he knocked me up.
Wow.
Yeah, with identical twins.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow. So twins.
So in 2013, we had identical twin boys, and in 2014, he made partner at EY, still in London. Mm-hmm. And in 2017, we decided to go ahead and move back to the States. Mm-hmm. It was about time that the kids were going to be starting school. It was time for us to come back. Like, it was just naturally, it was the right time for us to come back.
Yeah.
And so we moved back here in the summer of 2017, and everything that I just talked about with his diagnosis was in the summer of 2018.
Okay. So fast forwarding again now, you find...
I think I've missed that. 16, we moved back. 17 was his diagnosis.
Okay.
Right.
So about a year after you moved back here, this is when all of this starts happening with the diagnosis. And then fast forwarding again to where we left off, you have these boys who are at the time, what, 3 or 4?
So they, at the time that he was diagnosed, I think they had just turned 4.
Okay. So you find this dermatologist in the Charlotte area who's giving you some hope. Could you pick it up from there?
Yeah. Through her and along with some other help, we get in to see the specialist at Duke. And in the meantime, the dermatologist here and the specialist here at Levine Cancer Institute said, right, like, yes, you need to go see the specialist, but actually there's no reason for us not to treat you now. Like, let's get ahead of this. And so he started radiation treatment. So they, I think now we're in the beginning of November, just for the timeline. Yeah, we are definitely in the beginning of November. And so he goes in and he starts radiation treatment. And, this is something that had progressively been getting worse. It started off as what looked like a little bug bite. And now he's got, probably about 75% of his left shin is now this mass of tumors. That would get, because there's not a lot of meat on your shin, and so they would get really, really big, and then the skin would open up, and then it was traumatic, especially for a man who'd never been sick before. He'd never had any problems. And so anyway, so off we go to Duke, and we get to Duke, and Duke, initially they say to us, we think you've been misdiagnosed because this is such a rare diagnosis. We want to do some of our own testing. So at this point, he has another biopsy. I think we're on like the 5th or 6th biopsy. And he's having it where he's already having radiation treatment. And so and the radiation treatment, by the way, is incredibly effective. Like literally, he has one treatment and the next day, there's a noticeable difference in the tumors. And so that gives us even more hope. Now we're like, okay, like this is it. Like we're getting somewhere. We're treating it. It's getting better. Something that's been getting worse for 2 months, finally it's getting better. So we go off to Duke. They give us this kind of like sliver of hope that there's a misdiagnosis. Although I think we both were in complete disbelief that could actually be the case. In the meantime, what's happened in the background without us knowing is that lab in Jacksonville picked up something in that original biopsy that they were not comfortable diagnosing. And so on their own, they had sent the sample to Duke and asked Duke to reconfirm what they had seen in that original biopsy. So we see Duke. The doctors we see at Duke don't even know they have this sample in their lab because this has all happened through this other lab in Jacksonville. We don't even know what's happening. And as happens when you go to any medical institution now, they ask you to sign up for their app, right? Download our app. You'll get all of your notifications through this app. So about 3 days after we see Duke, he gets a ping in the app saying his biopsy results are ready. And he thinks, that was really fast, right? We were just there 3 days ago. But he goes in and he looks at it and he sees this report saying confirmed diagnosis of cutaneous T-cell lymphoma of a gamma delta origin. And we're like, gamma delta? So I don't even know this is happening now. He's doing this on his own. So he goes online and he Googles it because that's what you do. What is this gamma delta thing? I've never seen it before. So as it turns out, he doesn't just have cutaneous T-cell lymphoma. He has this, in cutaneous T-cell lymphoma, there's about 18,000 cases of it a year. It's rare. It turns out he has a gamma delta variant, which is just has to do with where the mutation in the cell occurs. And there's only been 50 cases of this type of cancer ever.
What? Oh my God.
And it has approximately a 15-month survival rate.
When does he tell you about this? Because you said he's looking up on his own.
He calls me. I was out. He calls me. He asks me to come home, and I come home, and then he tells me about it. And he tells me instantly, don't Google it. Like I've called Duke. I've asked for an answer. Like at this point, we don't even know where the samples come from. Like we find out all this kind of back stuff has happened after the fact. Duke's insistent, no way that this is the case. Like, this is such a rare diagnosis that it, like, and not only that, but like his presentation was not keeping in line with that diagnosis. Mm-hmm. So they're like, no. In the meantime, he tells me not to Google it, and I do exactly that.
Of course.
And so we both now have this knowledge, this 15-month kind of clock has started ticking, but we're not talking to each other about it. Like, neither of us, we both pretend like we didn't read that. The dermatologist here in Charlotte, who's, I still have so much gratitude towards her and the way that she helped us through this whole process. She's being kind of as giving us as much information as she can give us. One of the things they tell us is that, well, gamma delta doesn't respond to radiation treatment, and you're responding to radiation treatment.
So there's no way it could be that, right?
Yeah,
that's what they're saying.
He has none of the underlying, no comorbidities, no other diagnoses, there's no other reason, nothing else to support that this is what's happening with him. But unfortunately, in the end, it was an absolute accurate diagnosis. So he has this rare form of lymphoma that only, less than 50 other people in the world have ever had.
When the reality of this finally settles, you guys know after so many months what it is and what it means. Yeah. What was that like for you guys, and how did you make it through that?
So he finishes his radiation treatment, and we had already planned this trip to New York for Thanksgiving. And so he finishes the radiation treatment, and the next day we get on a plane and we take the kids to New York for Thanksgiving, and we go to the Macy's Day Parade, and we go to we do all of this stuff. But I think we're holding our breath the whole time. Like, the radiation has worked, but we don't really know what's going to happen next. And healing from the radiation is really painful. He had basically 3rd-degree burns on pretty much his entire left shin, wrapping around to his calf. And here we are in New York with our kids in a hotel room, and I'm changing bandages in the bathroom, and it's just nothing like anything we'd ever experienced. And we were literally holding our breath. And then a week went by, and then 2 weeks went by, and then 3 weeks went by, and it's almost Christmas, and no signs of cancer. He has a PET scan, and he's free of cancer. And so we kind of I think that week of Christmas, we kind of really started to breathe again. And I can remember talking to him and saying, this is it. Now you just go to the doctor every couple of months. We're vigilant. We watch for any other signs of the cancer coming back, but we just get on with our lives. Mm-hmm. This is behind us now. And then on the 27th of December, he finds another mass in his leg. The 28th was my 39th birthday. So he finds it on the 27th. He finds it on the 26th. He tells me about it on the 27th. We go in, he has a biopsy, and we find out just after the new year that it's positive, that it's the cancer. So then that starts us down the next path, which is, okay, now what do we do next? Do we do more radiation? Is it chemo? Is it, what is it? And where do we go? Is Duke the place to go after this kind of, oh, it's not cancer, oh, it is cancer. Mm-hmm. We don't have, we kind of lost a little bit of confidence. And I remember, and in the same time, there's a hospital in Houston called MD Anderson Cancer Center. And it is one of the best cancer centers in the world. And we had the option to go there, but we felt like we had it under control. We liked the treatment he was getting. And I remember sitting down with our dermatologist here at LCI and saying to her, if this was you, if this was your husband, if this was your son, where would you go? And there was very little hesitation before she said MD Anderson. So then that started the next leg of this journey, which was, flying to Houston, getting opinions at Houston, trying to figure out kind of what the next step was.
Mm-hmm. And then, so this was at around the New Year time period. You guys are in Houston. Did you just move there full stop, or
not quite? So we had already been, we had been to Duke, and they, the next treatment thing was a bone marrow transplant or stem cell transplant. That was the next kind of conversation that everybody was having. But we were having a really hard time finding a doctor who had successfully treated Chris's cancer.
Because it's so rare.
So rare. And not only that, but most of the patients with this cancer are older, and they have heart issues, they have diabetes, they have obesity, they have all these other complications that don't necessarily make them good candidates for treating the cancer. Whereas here's Chris, 38, healthy, never been sick, no other issues. And so the doctors here were just a little bit like, well, how aggressive should we be with the treatment? Or do we not treat it aggressively and hope that it doesn't progress aggressively? Whereas we get to MD Anderson and had this amazing we went there in February, the beginning of February, and literally the doctors were all immediately in agreement that it was a bone marrow biopsy, or bone marrow transplant. That was they said, look, we can chase this cancer around your body or we can cure you. And we want to cure you.
Yeah.
And so that was the road that we took.
So was he placed on a list, and how did things go from there?
So the way that it works is, in order for him, they want you to be in remission before they do a bone marrow transplant. So the plan was, let's get you into remission, and then we'll do the transplant. So they started him on a form of chemotherapy, a 5-agent chemotherapy called CHOEP, which is basically 5 different types of chemo drugs given. You get them over a course of 2 days, and then you have you kind of get them over a course a couple of days, and then you have about 3 weeks of recovery, and then you do it all again, and then you do it all again. And so he had the first treatment literally there in Houston. We canceled our flight. The kids were with my in-laws here in Charlotte. We were staying in a hotel. Like, it was just the surrealness of it all.
Yeah.
I just remember thinking it just all felt so unreal. We were 20, 25, 30 years younger than anybody around us in all of the waiting rooms. And it just felt so
how?
Yeah.
I can imagine that would be so hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah.
It's not only is this one of the most rare things ever, not only has this never really happened to someone this young, we didn't see this coming. I can't imagine it'd be impossible to process.
It was. And so we just kind of put one foot in front of the other. And, in Chris's credit, his focus was on beating it. I think that there were probably moments where he felt that uncertainty of what is going to happen, but he never let that part show. His focus was on beating it. And so when they said, we think you should start chemotherapy, he was like, today, let's start it. He was ready to get past this part and to the cure. We started with looking at his sister as a potential match. A familial match is the best possible match. Unfortunately, she wasn't a match. So then we went to the database, the Be the Match registry database. And over the course of his chemotherapy treatments, we're getting updates and we're finding out kind of where we stand. And because we never do things simply in our lives, move to London, have identical twins, get a super rare cancer. He has 3 perfect matches. 3 perfect stranger matches.
That's very rare too.
Some people never find a match. They're having lots of success now with half matches. So because it's so difficult to find that, and they find 3. And not only that, but it's a 38-year-old male, literally 100% match.
Stars could not have aligned more in that moment.
His long lost identical twin brother in Germany.
Yeah.
Ready to donate. So, unfortunately, despite the chemotherapy and early success with the chemotherapy, as well as more radiation treatment, he does not go into remission. So just as we feared, the cancer is progressing very quickly. But still, there's lots of good news, which is it's not in his bone marrow and it's not in his blood. Even though it's a blood cancer, his is presenting only in the skin and a little bit into the subcu tissue. And so again, that's all really positive. It's not in any of his organs. It's not, it's not in any of his lymph nodes. Like these are like, and so even though he's not in remission, it's still very contained and it's still very treatable. So in May, he goes into the hospital and undergoes another round of very intensive chemotherapy that pretty much completely wipes out his entire immune system. Completely wipes out all traces of cancer because all signs that he had are now gone. And he gets his stem cell transplant, his bone marrow transplant. All this time, our kids are living in Charlotte with my in-laws, and Chris and I are living in Houston in an apartment a couple of blocks from the hospital.
Yeah, I imagine that in itself was difficult.
Very.
Yeah.
Very. The kids had come to Houston to visit. We had come home after the chemo, before the transplant, we had come home. I was kind of back and forth. I went for their birthday. So we were, trying to like juggle this back and forth. But at the same time, my husband was he did not want our kids to see him weak or sick, or he didn't want them to be scared.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. This whole story so far has just been, I mean, like you said, a movie where it's romance and then tragedy and ups and downs. And unfortunately, that's not the end of the story, the transplant. So where do things go from there?
Yeah, so his recovery is going really well. Everything that we want to have happen is happening. And then a new bump pops up. And then it goes away. And then another one pops up. And then it goes away. And so we're like, right, this has got to be a good sign. That means
it's fighting it.
His immune system is fighting it. And then in July, I think it was in July, we get the all clear from the doctor. It's been 100 days post-transplant. The doctors are like, right, you can go back to Charlotte. You can carry on with your treatment with your team in Charlotte at LCI. And so we start making plans to come home. And at this point, he really relapses. I came home before him. His parents stayed with him in Houston. I came home to the kids. And over this time, he's telling me on the phone, like I found another one. So then they start him on another chemotherapy to try and get this relapse under control. And he still comes home. You second guess everything. Don't know if that was the right decision or not, but he comes home. And I remember seeing him for the first time, and it was the first time that he actually looked sick in this whole process. He had, he went from being cancer-free, and in a matter of 3 weeks, he had cancer on about 75% of his body.
How do you deal with that up and down? I mean, just the roller coaster sounds exhausting and frustrating.
I get that question a lot in a lot of respects, but I think you deal with the matter at hand. You put one foot in front of the other and you keep moving forward.
You had something to focus on,
right.
Every time.
Recovery.
Yeah.
I mean, that was always the focus, was getting him better. And I didn't, ultimately he went into the hospital. And I remember it very clearly because I have a good friend who is a nurse manager at CMC Maine or Atrium. And I remember calling her that night saying, we're coming in. Chris has spiked a fever. It's not going down. We're coming in. And that, I can replay every single moment. I could probably even recite verbatim every conversation I had that night. I didn't know then, but he would never leave the hospital from that day.
And when was this again? September. How long was he in the hospital for that time? And I assume you got there and they just said, look, things are...
No, we got there and they said, we don't really know what's going on. His white count's down. They admitted him. His parents came. There was a hurricane coming, if you remember.
Oh, yeah.
The first hurricane coming, and then it was like, well, what should we do? And then there were all these things it could be, and then they would rule it out, and then they would say this, and they would say that. And then ultimately it came down to he, again, just add it to the column of rareness, he had developed a autoimmune disease, a rare complication that happens when your immune system is so suppressed, and all of a sudden it really has to fight. Suddenly your immune system gets really confused and it just starts killing all the cells. And so his body was not producing any new white cells. His own immune system was killing those cells instantly as soon as they were made. And then all of a sudden LCI was like, whew, like, we've treated this before, but it's so rare. MD Anderson in Houston has a protocol right now, a clinical trial protocol. We need to get you to Houston.
Again.
Yeah. And so he was life-flighted. We left on a, 5-6-seater plane, literally in the middle of the night. We get on this plane and we fly to Houston. It was terrifying. It was me, him, and his father, and then 2 medical staff and the pilots. We leave out from Charlotte at like 2 a.m. We land in Houston, sometime around 7. He gets admitted to the hospital, and almost immediately his condition deteriorates. And he's having breathing problems, and it's just from that moment on. So this is September. It passed away in November. Those 2 months, it was just everything that could go wrong went wrong. Everything. And he had a second stem cell transplant from the same donor, but it was just too much. It was all just too much. And he passed away on November 16th.
You've been putting one step in front of the other for so long, and now you're just...
Like, the number that sticks out to me is 15 months. Because that's what we both found, is that this cancer had a survivor rate of 15 months. And he died almost exactly 15 months after his diagnosis. I mean, I definitely think there was a little bit of shock. A little bit, I say, because like I said, the last 2 months, he was so, like, he even arrested at one point. Like, he went into cardiac arrest while I was sitting right next to him, and they had to come in and, like, do the defibrillator, and so, like, while it was still a surprise, because it was that morning, when I got the call, that was the morning that I knew this is it. Up until that point, I still had this feeling, because even though all these things have been going wrong, he kept fighting back.
Every single time it would right itself. Yeah.
Every time. It was like, and so it was like, okay, well, but this, whatever reason, this was the time where I thought, it's not gonna happen. And we were never clear whether or not, if he did survive, was he gonna be 100% himself cognitively. Mm-hmm. And we didn't know the answer to that. And I hold on to that, to be honest, right? Because,
that would have been impossible in its own way.
Yeah. And he knew something wasn't right. And so, I remember, like, that was a Friday morning, and I remember thinking, like, I'm going to make all these plans, and I'm not leaving here without him. And then suddenly it was like a light bulb. It was like a cartoon moment of me thinking, oh my God, like, our kids don't know. And so I got on a flight and flew back Saturday morning so that I could be the one to tell them. And, I think that's the blessing in this, is that I do have 2 kids, and they have to go to school every morning, and they have to eat dinner, and they have to have baths, and they have to have normalcy. And that's kind of forced me, as much as I would love to lie in bed and pull the covers over my head, I don't have that option. Mm-hmm. Because that's not what my kids need. And that's not what my husband would have wanted.
Wow. He passed away
November 2018
of this year.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I know obviously your kids are giving you strength to fall into this routine.
Yeah.
But when you do have those really low points where you think, I can't do this, which I imagine you have those days, how do you get through that? How do you push through that?
I think a couple of things. One is that I've, for only having been in Charlotte for less than 3 years, I have found myself surrounded by some amazing, incredible women and families who, you know, some who I don't even know, like really and truly, who've heard my story and who have brought meals to my house, or who have, you know, donated to buy Christmas toys for my kids, or contributed to having a Christmas tree delivered by elves on Christmas. And so that has been, you know, I've asked repeatedly my friends who were kind of leading the charge on that to tell me who all these people are so I can write thank you cards. And they're like, it's just too many. Like, there's not enough thank you cards or time for you to write them. And that's part of it. A huge part of it.
Yeah.
I talk about him all the time. A lot of times on my Instagram page. You know, initially with his permission while he was going through this. And then kind of once he got to the point that he couldn't talk about it, I tried to honor what I thought he would have been okay with. And talking about it helps. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this or agreed to do this, is that, you know, our situation is unthinkable, but actually it's not just our situation. There are plenty of other people that are going through this and don't have that support system, don't have that tribe of people around them holding them up. And if talking about it and showing that I still struggle, it's still hard for me, helps them, that makes me feel better. If that makes sense. I don't know if it does or not.
No, it does. And, you know, it's something a lot of my guests have said is that, you know, bottling it up was the worst thing they did. It was the easy thing to do, but it was the hardest on their hearts and, you know, their healing. So absolutely. And I'm so glad you came and have the strength to share that story. When you look back at yourself as, you know, even a college student, would you ever think that Jen then would have the strength to be where Jen today is?
I don't think the Jen yesterday feels like I have the strength to be the Jen of today. You know, I don't know what I expected out of life then, but it certainly wasn't, you know, even when Chris and I first started dating, I didn't expect to marry him. I didn't expect him to be my best friend forever. We grew into one another until I couldn't really imagine my life without him. You know, I didn't know we were going to spend 10 years living abroad and traveling, and, you know, I say this a lot, but in times when I'm really struggling, it's really hard, I want to find gratitude. I want to give gratitude, because as hard as my life is, it could be so much harder. And Chris is the first person that I think about, because he gave me an amazing life. Yeah. He gave me an amazing life for, you know, 10 years when it was just the two of us, married years. He gave me 2 amazing children. He gave them an amazing life. We have an amazing, beautiful home and in a beautiful community. And that, you know, he provided that.
And now years of beautiful memories that you had. I mean, the past couple years were hard, but man, you guys had a fairy tale.
Yeah. And we lived it. You know, we really, you know, I think we both did. I think we both really lived life and did, you know, sometimes maybe got bogged down in the little things, but for the most part, appreciated the life that we had too. You know, appreciated the struggles.
Yeah.
And so I'm so grateful to him. And talking about him, you know, I can't imagine ever him not being a part of my life.
And your boys too. I mean, when you look, and it might be difficult now to envision, but 10, 15 years down the line, when the boys are older, I mean, I imagine they're going to know their dad when they're older. I imagine this is always going to be a conversation between you. How do you envision your life being then when they're older, when they're teenagers, when they're young adults?
You know, it's funny. The kids and I talk about their dad all the time. You know, simple things like, when a song comes on the radio, we'll say, "Oh, Dad, love this song," or my friends had blankets made out of all of my husband's t-shirts and gave them to the boys. And so they lie in bed at night just before I tuck them in, and we talk about the t-shirts. Like, do you remember when Daddy wore this shirt when we went to Disney World? Or do you remember how Daddy wore this shirt on his 0th birthday, which was the day that he had his bone marrow transplant? And they remember him in this Star Wars t-shirt or this Fender t-shirt or whatever it was. And so we talk about him all the time. And I envision in 10, 15, 20 years' time, those conversations would continue. I am lucky that I knew my husband as well as I knew him. And it's a big responsibility on me, but one that I want, and I'm grateful to have, that I get to keep his memory alive and his children.
Yeah. If there's any life lesson that you've taken away from all of this, is there something that stands out to you, something that you'll take from all this? I know there's a lot. And you've talked about appreciating the moments at the time. Yeah. Do you feel like you do that more now?
I do.
Yeah.
And also, trying to give, for me personally, just to try and remember to give grace, not just to myself, but people around me too. Everybody is suffering from some sort of a trauma or some sort of a loss of some form or another, whether it's recent or years ago, whether it's small in comparison to me or huge in comparison. We're all suffering from trauma, and we're all just trying to make it from A to B in the best way that we can. And I think it's easy to forget that. It's easy to lay on the horn when somebody doesn't go right at the moment the light turns green. And we don't know. You don't know what they're going through. I've sat at a green light and cried. Maybe that's what they're doing. And I want to do more to remember that and to give grace to people and not to be so quick to react when somebody isn't behaving in a way that I think that they should.
That's so true. I think that's something everyone should remember. We get so caught up in these little stupid things in life. We fight over nothing. We hate over nothing. And really, everyone's going through or has gone through something. And you don't know what that is. And spreading love is the best thing you can do. We talked about what you want for your boys in 10, 15, 20 years. What about for yourself? Where do you hope that you can find peace eventually?
I don't think it gets easier. I think it gets less hard, but I don't think it gets easier. I'm looking forward to the day when it gets less hard. Or the week or the month. But for me, I think I want to live a life that would have made Chris proud.
Yeah. Is there any final advice for maybe people who are listening who are going through something maybe similar with a loved one? Any advice you can give based on what you went through? I know you're still in the middle of trying to heal.
I think if you're taking care of a loved one, don't forget to take care of yourself. Because in the end, if you're not healthy, if you're not, you can't pour from an empty cup. And I was so lucky that my husband recognized what I needed for me. He recognized that I needed to make it to the gym or make it to yoga. He knew that. And he really allowed me to do that. And there were times where he really needed me, but he let me go because he knew that what I needed was just as important. And so what I would say, if you are caring for somebody, think about that. If you're being cared for, think about that. It's so easy to forget that you're not alone in it. You know, that your wife or your parent or, you know, whoever it is that's helping you through it, they need to take care of themselves too. And that is, I mean, that's definitely a lesson I learned in this. And I think the other thing is that, and this is something that I am learning now, is that the grieving process is not linear. You know, you don't tick, it's not a, you know, you don't say, okay, there's anger. Yep, I've been there now. Ooh, now there's sorrow, or now there's denial. Like, it is a constant back and forth. You know, I have days where I feel great and I think to myself, all right, like, this is it. This is the less hard. And the next day, you know, it's like a ton of bricks. And I'm right back to that feeling of like, surely this can't be real. Like, I'm going to wake up any second from this nightmare. And so recognizing that, I think, is important.
Yeah.
And then finding your outlet. You know, for me, it is talking about it. And I do find comfort in this. Knowing that maybe I'm helping other people, but whatever your outlet is, find your outlet. Don't hold it in.
Yeah. My last question before you say goodbye is, what do you find joy in now?
My kids. You know, they're so resilient and so innocent. And they don't have the ability to understand forever yet. And so they're still so innocent. And I so envy that. But also, it's something that I can borrow every now and again.
Yeah.
You know, they, as hard as this has been, I still have an amazing life ahead of me with them.
Yes, you do. Absolutely. And they are cute. Oh my goodness.
I know. You heartbreakers.
Oh man. Oh man. Yeah.
They look just like their dad.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. Oh my God. I mean, honestly, you're one of the strongest people I've ever met. I think so many of your words, you might not even realize how much they're going to resonate with people and how much they're just resonating with me, just the two of us sitting in this room. Your story just proves there's light, you know? Things can shock you, and in a way that you never expected. Things can happen that are 1 in a million, but there's still always a life ahead, and there's beauty in everything. And I'm so glad that you've had that story with your husband, who seems like an amazing, incredible man, and now you have these 2 wonderful kids. And I wish you all the best in life, and thank you so much for coming in to share your story.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate it. And thank you for listening to Unbroken, the podcast. We'll see you next time.